60 years ago, this month, December, in the year 1953, I found myself in a place that didn't really have a name. It was called a number, K3. And it was the headquarters squadron of 1st Marine Air Wing. And I was there courtesy of the United States government. Christmas situation like that just doesn't feel right somehow. I did the best we could, you know, with the powdered eggs and the other treats that we had at Christmas, but still, it's a little bit like this island I have put up here. Don McAllister said he couldn't read the bottom part, and I can hardly read it myself, so I don't know why I picked that font. It looked good on the computer last night. But if you can read it, it says Inaccessible Island. It's a real place. It's in the South Atlantic, and it's inaccessible. Well, I mean, you can actually be dropped on it with a helicopter or something nowadays, but back in the old days when there wasn't really any good place to land. So nobody lives there. It's inaccessible. It's a nice name for an island. I guess if I had one, I'd like it to be called Inaccessible Island. I wouldn't get many visitors that way, I suppose. Well, just to prove to you that I'm not embroidering the truth, preachers, of course, never do that, but I wanted to kind of show you that it does exist, so let's see if we can. There, it's working. Okay, now can you read this sign? I know it's a little hard, but this sign is on a huge island 22 miles away from Inaccessible Island called Tristan da Cajon, population 200. It's a huge metropolis compared to Inaccessible Island. Now, there are no cruise ships that go to this part of the world. It's in the deep South Atlantic. There are no visits there. There's no airport. If you want to go by boat, you have to take off from Cape Town, South Africa, or you can go from Montevideo or from Argentina, Buenos Aires, and you can go up 700, 800, 900, 1,100 miles, something like that. So can you read any of those signs? I don't think so. If you can, you really have good eyes. You don't belong in this class, okay? But you will notice that it does say Inaccessible Island, and remember you can't see the laser there, but the third in the middle, on the right, 22 miles, okay. Now I chose an inaccessible island as a kind of metaphor because where we're working at in James, it seems like some qualities are inaccessible to certain persons. Now, to me, inaccessible, of course, stands for kind of being all alone, being out there, having no help, nobody can reach you. But I wonder if we ever put ourselves into that condition, if we ever put ourselves on Inaccessible Island, so to speak. That is something to really think about, and it really does exist. But maybe it exists in your mind, maybe it exists in your reality. Maybe you're stuck out somewhere on an inaccessible island and nobody much sees you there or comes by to say hello. Well, okay, so I was thinking about that crazy island, and the reason was that I looked up St. Helena's because I wanted to see where Napoleon had died, and then I discovered these other islands belong to Britain, and they're in this chain way down the list, so that's how I ended up with Inaccessible Island. You say, well, what in the world, Bob, does that have to do with the letter of James on active faith? Well, I hope you'll see eventually as I work my way to it, as I make a connection with it. But we're at the part of James now where we're looking at active faith. Now, this active faith is a topic James gets into after this completely marvelous statement that he makes right before that. Mercy wins out over judgment. A lot of people translate that triumphs. And that's okay. That's probably pretty accurate. But it wins out, that's the same thing, right? That actually means to boast over. Mercy boasts over judgment. Mercy boasts at judgment. That's an interesting idea. And then it isn't very long that James moves on into the area of an active faith. Active faith seems to be sort of a hard idea to grasp for some of us, maybe for me at times, I'm not sure. Austin Farrar, the British theologian, said this. He's a moved into circles of C.S. Lewis. If you don't read any other book by Austin Farrar, I don't recommend reading Rebirth of Images. That's impossible unless you really need to be confused. Fabulous writer, but that one escapes me. But he has a little book called Saving Faith. Simple, well-done book. And Austin Farrar says something right at the start that I've always been impressed with. When we appreciate God for who He is, we will respond to Him as He deserves. I just want you to take that in for a moment because it's very profound. When we appreciate God for who He is, then we will respond to Him as He deserves. So if we don't know who God is, it's almost impossible to make the right response. But the proper response to God is not something complex or philosophical, it's called faith. But what's the nature of this faith? What does this faith look like? Is this faith something of our own creation? I think this faith has to be appropriate to its object, and its object is God. Well, let's think for a moment about something being appropriate. Okay, let me throw a picture up here for you. And I want you to think for a moment, does anybody know this man? Look closely. Do you know this man? Nobody knows him, right? Not a person here knows this man, right? Okay. I didn't either until last week. I'll give you a clue. See if this helps. Here's a clue. Okay, here's a hint. Okay. You see the name of this maximum security prison? What's it? Robbins Island. Where's Robbins Island? It's off the coast of Cape Town, South Africa. Who was a prisoner there 27 years? Anybody? Nelson Mandela. The man you saw earlier was his guard, his jailer. His name has improbably Christo Brand. Isn't that a great name for somebody? Christo Brand. I don't know how he came up with that name, but how would you feel about a guy who was your guard for 27 years in a maximum security prison? It'd be hard to have good feelings, wouldn't it? How could you even ask someone not to take revenge on somebody like that? Or at best, make sure he got fired. Because you know where Nelson Mandela went from prison, don't you? Where did he end up? President of the country. So they could have done pretty well what he wanted to do. Well, what did he do? And I'll show you a picture here. They became friends. Because Nelson Mandela not only forgave this guard, but invited him to his inauguration as president of South Africa. And that's a peculiar sort of reaction from someone. We wouldn't normally think that would be what we maybe could do, but maybe we could. But if we could do something like that, then we must have discovered a new sort of freedom about ourselves that we didn't know we had. Something had happened to us, and we weren't living on Inaccessible Island anymore, but now we were accessible. We discovered some freedom to do something that would have been impossible, I suspect. Living in our world of payback, Lee Iacocca, I don't get mad, I get even. You remember that? And all the sentiment that even in the church through the years, you have things like we looked at the Spanish Inquisition, we're going to get you heretics and take your property too. And it reminded me very much of the Wicked Witch in The Wizard of Oz who says to Dorothy, what? I'll get you and your little dog too. Only the dog's name wasn't Two, it was Toto. Christo Brand at the presidential palace, having a laugh with his former prisoner. Christo Brand was we later found out that actually he was changed by Mandela while he was still a guard. His whole character changed. And one day Mandela just simply wanted to see his granddaughter because he wasn't permitted to even see his granddaughter. because the cell was monitored all the time. Brand worked it out somewhere to get out of view of the monitor, and they brought the little granddaughter in, and Nelson Mandela was able to see the granddaughter. Later, Brand said, he was my prisoner, but before he left, he became my father. How could something like that happen? Well, maybe Nelson Mandela discovered a freedom that is a good thing. But learning to do the appropriate thing is not easy. Sometimes it's difficult. Now, let's move on to something kind of strange. What do we have here? 3 dogs, right? Now, how many of you are dog lovers? Well, don't raise your hands. It's a pointless thing, because that declares you somehow on one side or the other. Does that mean you don't like cats? No, we don't want to get into that, okay? Or that you hate squirrels, or what? I don't know. But there's 3 different dogs here. The dog on the left. Now, do you know that in the United States of America, there are 12 states that have official dogs? Only 12. One of them is Alaska. Now, what would you think if I said to you, I think the state dog of Alaska should be the first one? Do you have any problem with that? Warmly dressed? Why would you have a problem with this? Does that seem inappropriate somehow, this dog? When you think of Alaska, what kind of dog do you think of? Husky? Or the variation of the husky, which is the real state dog, the Malamute, which looks like a husky. It was a little bigger or something, a little stronger, I think. I don't know that much about dogs. Anybody got a Malamute pet for a pet? Good. Okay, I can come to your house then. Now, so you say that's inappropriate. That is inappropriate. Now, Tennessee does not have a state dog, although through the University of Tennessee, I suppose we have an unofficial state dog. What is that dog? A red tick hound, to be distinguished, no doubt, from a blue tick hound. Suppose we were to say this second dog should be the Tennessee state dog. Would that be inappropriate? The way the team played this year, you think it's inappropriate? But you're right, it is. It doesn't fit Tennessee. A French poodle, no. What about the little state of Rhode Island? Would this be an appropriate state dog? It's a Great Dane called George. It's the biggest dog in the world. Why would that be inappropriate? Which dog up there would fit Rhode Island better? No, I'm not. I think the first dog, you're right, it definitely would fit with Rhode Island. Okay, so you say, well, all right, now what I'm seeing here, there is something inconsistent about this. None of these fit. They don't fit. And somebody says, explain that to me. Well, I have to explain it to you then, I'm not going to say you're beyond help, but I will say something's missing there. There's something missing in knowing what's appropriate. So we can't have that little dog with the beanie on. He just can't be an Alaskan dog. He couldn't pull a sled, not even a toy sled. That won't work. Okay, and Tennessee will. We wouldn't stand for a French poodle. And Rhode Island, with all their pretension that you little old bitty state so small you could cross it in half an hour. You want a Great Dane, forget it, man. You're going to get the little dog on the left. Okay, so what's appropriate, you see? And all of us have this sense that, wow. Now suppose we start thinking well, it doesn't make any sense what you're saying. And suppose we start saying what James talks about doesn't make any sense at all. I don't understand what he introduces next. I don't understand how this happens. I don't even understand what it exactly means. But here it is. And I throw it up here for your consideration eventually. Why, brothers, why are you demoting faith to a purely intellectual level? How has it gotten there? It's about as appropriate as having a Great Dane as a state dog of Rhode Island. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. How did faith get into that situation? That's not the kind of response to God that we would expect. It does not kind of fit. It doesn't kind of make any sense. But it happens. Now, when faith gets into this category, there's something strange process going on here. Now, I heard Harvey Floyd say one time that what you don't want to have is just pure fideism. And fideism is a philosophy that faith, or this is popularized by a German philosopher named Wittgenstein. I'm sure you're all familiar with Wittgenstein, but Wittgenstein said, you don't need any reasons to have faith. In fact, if you have to have reasons, it's not the real faith of the Bible. Boy, now that's becoming inaccessible to me, you know. Now what's happening is faith now becomes a philosophy that we debate. Well, something like that's going on, and is that that's not like having a Malamute in Alaska. That's like having a toy dog pulling a sled. It just doesn't work. So James makes a comment on it, and here's how it runs. It's a little small print, but what do you expect, you know? We have people here who sell glasses. They'll be glad to talk to you. But look at what he says. What's the benefit? What's the benefit, my brothers? If someone says, okay, we say something, you're talking, you say, I have faith, but don't do anything. I never act on it. It doesn't have a real meaning in my life, but I possess faith. Well, I don't know what the guy's talking about. That doesn't make any sense to me. Well, surely, James says, that type of faith has no power to save him, does it? And then he gives an example of the brother or sister who doesn't really have inadequate clothing. Literally, the term is gumnos, naked, but we take that to mean inadequately clothed and not eating all day long, haven't had any nourishment all day long. And someone in your group says, may you be warm and be stuffed. Literally, the Greek kartazo means to be stuffed. Not only wishing them that they would have a good meal and be satisfied, but literally be stuffed. Nice thought. But nothing happens. You don't even get a check to go down to McDonald's and buy a hamburger. You don't get a sweater or anything, or that second or third or fourth or fifth coat doesn't even come out of the closet. So James is puzzled by this. Somehow or another, faith has gotten its way to inaccessible island. You can't get to it anymore. It's become an intellectual concept. It's become remote. Now, we don't understand how this happens. I don't really personally know anyone that's exactly there, but it must have happened. Now, some scholars believe that the rich guy that was referred to earlier in chapter 2, who was welcome to the assembly when the poor were not, that this man has become very attractive, you see. And in becoming attractive to the church, they want to say to him, no, discipleship is not all that demanding. We need you. For you, we make an exception. Well, I don't want to give my money to any poor people. It's important to keep it in my family. I don't want to do a lot of that. Don't you worry about it. You don't have to. In a sense, refining and defining faith in a very different way for this particular desirable individual. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. It may be the scenario we're looking at. But something odd has happened. And now we're redefining faith in a way in which you don't have to get all that involved. And it's kind of like if we were to start here, say, next Sunday and say, now, we're going to change the rules here a little bit. You know, we have an invitation, and you're always welcome to come down. But from now on, you only have to come halfway down, and you can place associate membership. And that's okay with us. You know, it's a first step, be good for you, we need that. And we're going to put elders halfway down, see? And then we'll move it back and finally to the last row. And you'd say, well, Bob, that's ridiculous. Well, of course, but how do strange things like happen? So James says, what benefit is it? What benefit is it just to talk? And that's what's going on here, lots of talking. So we have a talking. What does a talking faith look like? To me, it's out on an inaccessible isle somewhere. I don't know how to get there, and I don't want to get there. But maybe James is saying something like this to me. He's saying, well, yeah, you intellectually understand active faith, but you don't practice active faith. Now that may be more close to what he's getting at here, is that maybe I say, yeah, that's really bad stuff, but then in my daily life, maybe I'm not so outgoing, and maybe I don't get outside of Inaccessible Island all that much myself. I don't know. I have to think about that. Okay, so now James says, you know, something's happened to us. We've lost our vision. That's what we've just lost our vision of what we're all about. We've lost touch somehow with who we are. Who are we anyway? How do we lose touch with ourselves? How do we get stuck on an inaccessible island? Well, I don't know. Maybe it's because we've lost a vision of who God is, in a way. Now today, there was some very good conversation about that idea of taking in God. And it's all a metaphor, of course. We know that, but without metaphors, we couldn't exist intellectually. We wouldn't understand anything. Who is this God who somehow comes through the back door of the world, to use Tiliki's phrase, doesn't appear in a marble palace in Rome, but shows up in a stable or a cave, perhaps, some tell us, with a bunch of animals? Who is this God? This is bewildering, you see, because if I had to design a criterion and an agenda for God, it would probably look like that. Someone said, Hendren, God's going to visit the planet here and going to stay for 33 years. Now, what's your idea? I said, well, there will be no Motel 6 for this guy, I'll tell you. And even though he keep the light on, that's not good enough. We're going to go all the way to the top here, because nothing's too good. And that would be right, wouldn't it? But God says, no, I'm going to trump that. That's not my agenda at all. Is there something being said here? Something about who God is and the vision of God? Is that what we missed? Is that what these guys have missed? They just really lost their vision, and somehow you do what you can maybe, but you don't worry too much about it. So we end up with these kinds of things. We wish you well. We wish you well. Be warm. Stay warm, guy. Yeah, please stay warm. You need to stay warm. See, because if you don't, it's not healthy. So stay warm, okay? Well, okay, yeah. Have you got a blanket? No, I don't, but I got a good advice. Stay warm. Well, does the world need more advice? And it seems like there's plenty of advice around. I used to think preaching was holy advice. I give you holy advice. So you don't want my holy advice. What you want is God. Then once you know God, then Austin Farrar says you will respond to Him as He deserves. But if you don't know God, what's the point of all the holy advice, right? So you do all these things right. Big deal. You say to this guy, stay warm. You say, well, he deserves to be there because he's probably a bum. Well, maybe so. Or maybe that's you someday. I used to tell my students at UNA, I'd say, you know, I read the other day that if you can live another 15 years, you could live to be 150 because of medical advances. But the only problem is the last 50 you'll have to spend under a bridge because there won't be any money available. And they sort of like, ha, 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 you know, but I could see that look that, yeah, well, maybe so, you know, things are falling apart, so I'm going to live to be 150. I don't want to spend the last 100 to 150 years under a bridge. I don't know if we're going there or not, but it's spooky. Oh, maybe we say, we don't say that. That would be awfully crass. Maybe the really isolated people today, and certainly there are plenty of homeless. There's not a lack there, which we all know. But I'm worried about the people that live on inaccessible islands. You know, they don't know that nobody. They think they're sure nobody cares. You know. So from us, they get holy advice: be warm and filled. Is that what they need? Or maybe if our vision were the vision of God, maybe they need a personal visit of some sort. Isn't that kind of what it means when it, I just love the message that God set up a house in our neighborhood, you know. Well, literally, the Greek means pitched his tent. God came on a camping expedition to the earth and pitched his tent in our neighborhood. Yeah, that's really pretty good. Maybe we should pitch a tent somewhere near some of these people. I don't know. Get close to them, get to know them. Maybe these inaccessible people are the ones that don't need to be told, well, be warmer, Phil, or come to our building. Maybe we need to rethink our vision and start thinking more like God. It's just a thought, but I don't know. Maybe that's what James is really driving at here. Well, Paul, as he's thinking about the church, said in Galatians 5, faith energized by love is what avails. Faith energized by love. So if we're in this box, you know, we welcome you, but we don't get out of this box somehow and touch lives, I think that's kind of where James is going with this, you know. And so moving in that direction is going to require a certain amount of discomfort on our part, I'm afraid. Maybe some interactions that we're not quite ready for. Maybe you're like me. I like living on an inaccessible island a lot. It's quiet, it's peaceful, I can read. People don't bother me. My phone service doesn't reach there. I don't have to watch TV with all these so-called reality shows. There's not been a moment of reality in any of them as far as I've ever been able to figure. People are lost. They should stay lost. You know? They keep coming back. Got to get out of this box somehow, you know. Oh, we welcome you. If you come inside our box, you're very welcome. Well, we're not that way here, you say. And you're right. We're not. I mean, I see more coming out of a box here than I do most places. So what is a talking faith exactly? Well, to me, it's like a giant bauble. You know, it's interesting, attractive, and you can see yourself in it. To some, it's a little distorted, but it kind of puts. You know, it's nice. It's nice. It's a shiny little bauble, but as far as it accomplishing anything, I'm really not sure. My whole life turned around. I saw a giant Christmas bauble. I'm worried about you, my friend. Nice, but maybe there's something more that we need to be. What could it be? But then James turns to this strange thing about a talking faith, and he says, you want to know a group of people that do a lot of talking and have a lot of faith? Well, let me tell you about them. They're called demons. This is so odd that he would say this. A person says, I can divide faith and deeds up into two categories over here. I can divide them in one over here and one over here. So I can have an intellectual faith. And then there are times I may need to do some deeds. And James sort of said, hey, you know, to me they're connected, because if they're not connected, then you're just talking like some demon would talk. Because demons are monotheistic. But they don't want to be. It's just that the reasons and facts of existence compel them to understand it. And it's the last thing they want to believe. But reality drives them. And their belief only frightens them. Or, to put it another way, no demon is an atheist. Which is quite interesting when you think about it. No demon is an atheist. They just simply know better, but it doesn't make them happy. Why doesn't it make them happy? Because long ago they moved to inaccessible islands where they could not be touched by God, where they could rebel against Him and feel the joyous pain of that anger against God. Now, I may be borrowing a little from Milton here, but I don't know where else to go with this, but it's a thought. I imprison myself on this island of unbelief, and yet it turns out I still have to believe because facts are there and they won't go away, and they're too real. And my life, my existence crashes against them, and I have no future and no hope. but I have faith. You say, well, this is just a parody of Bible faith. It's not Bible faith, and I agree with you. You're completely right. It's a charade. But it's real. And Paul says something over in 1 Corinthians 13 that's quite interesting. And I know that you've all thought about it at the time and that you've all considered it, where he says, if I have all faith and I can remove mountains, yet have not love, I am nothing. I'm nothing. Wow, I've never thought of it that way before. So what is he trying to say? Well, he's trying to say the kind of faith that's appropriate for God is not simply an acknowledgement of his reality, but a wholehearted acceptance of his being and his character, and a surrender to his will. But I have all faith so that I can move mountains around, and yet have not love, I am nothing. Is not exactly getting where I need to be. He said it couldn't move mountains, and yet, strangely enough, faith moves mountains of indifference and uncaring and unconcern and ennui and alienation and loneliness and pain. Faith, you see, can do that. And then, well, no matter how little you have, faith will help you share it. You may not have much, but you can share what you have. And, well, so what did Nelson Mandela share with Christo O'Brien? If that had been me, I would have shared a lot of anger and a lot of resentment and a lot of hatred. I'm afraid. I hope I would be bigger than that. Someone asked Mandela how all this is possible. And he answered this way, that he had been given the freedom to love. Is that what faith does? Gives us the freedom to love? That nothing else does? Could I say this, looking my jailer in the face? Well, in a way, faith, I suppose, is a gift, really, in a way that has to be treasured. Now, I don't mean it's enforced on you, but what would you believe in if God had not acted and God had not spoken? But it's got to go beyond just intellectual, and we all know that. I challenge myself then to be free to love. Free of hatred, freedom of resentment, of freedom to love. That's the only way I think I'll ever get off Inaccessible Island. I don't really want to be stuck out there for eternity. I don't think you do either. Well, God bless each of you.